Right, okay, as you can probably figure out, I'm Guy Heathcote. I'm from the Ordnance Survey. I've been here since I was a teenager, so that's more than a couple of years, as you can probably guess there. And this is a map maker's introduction to Blender. So Blender is a 3D graphics creative tool, as you probably know. It's open source. It's something that is usually, I would say, tailored towards like artists and animators and game developers and people like that, but in actual fact it's used far beyond that, and indeed, as you may have already figured out, it is used by map makers as well. And why is that? It's got a render engine in it which can make fantastic looking images. So if you want something to look really good, then this could well be what you need. It is extremely flexible in what it can do. It's if you have got a creative side to you, it can really bring out a lot of that. There's a lot of tools there, and as I said, it's free as well. Why not use it if it's there, if you've got an idea about it? Now, it is a very complex, huge tool. I mean, it's probably the most complex open source tool I've ever heard of. There's loads to it, and there's a lot in there that probably isn't relevant to what you do. As so, I figured I would make a session today which is about trying to sort of introduce the bits that might be relevant, the basics, and then tie those in with ways of then introducing mapping and geospatial data within it and seeing what you can do. So you probably won't pick up all the technical details and the keys of what I'll be doing, but if you get the general idea, hopefully that's enough for you to then go away, install it, and give it a go. Now, I think you've got something on my screen here. I've got a couple of images of things that I've done in the past. So let's see. I guess I've got to click this first. Let's see. Is that going to work now? Yeah. So it can do things that you might expect like this, but I mean, you can also use it to make assets for other things. So we've got something called the virtual gallery, which has got a lot of Blender content in it. Use a game engine to do that as well. That's an online thing, so you can explore that if you like. We've done VR projects in the past that have then had a lot of Blender content within them. We've been involved with a simulation company doing work with them for autonomous vehicles. And yeah, this is a more recent thing I've been doing, and I'll get back to that later. So how do we start with all this? What I'm going to do is split this into two. The first bit is going to be the basic sort of skills, so nothing really to do with maps, but things you need to know anyway. And then I'll move on to the map orientated side. So, the other thing I was going to mention, regardless of what I've done, go on Twitter, go on social media and have a look. There's other people that are doing this stuff and they do some great work. So you might get some inspiration of what this can really do from them as well. Anyway, to get started, you'll need Blender, and Blender is available from blender.org/download. You go there, it's available for Windows, Linux and Mac. There's even Mac Silicon special version there. Just use the one that's current version. There's usually previews, but if you're starting out, just get the current one. You'll get a download. The download install procedures, platform specific, but it's usually pretty easy. And once you've got it installed and you start it up, then what should happen, and this is the scary bit when I go into sort of live mode here, whereas this one, if I can move this across, you will see something like this, which is Blender. And the first thing you might notice is this big pop-up box in the middle with a picture on. The image Blender obviously creates this is version specific. I'm using 3.1 here, which is a couple of versions out of date. I'm going to update to 3.3 very soon. That's just out. But I thought I'd leave it on this one while I'm used to it up until we got this session out the way. And there's some links there and things like that. But usually just click off of it and then you see the entire thing there. And at this point, let's go make that go away. That's not what I wanted. This is where new users will then go into panic mode, wondering what all this stuff is. So a little bit of orientation here. At the top left-hand corner, we have a standard well, in this case, it's a Windows one, menu bar, and we've got things like quit and save and new and all of those sorts of things there, and help, which is good. So yeah, that's something which is a little bit familiar. But below that, what you've got mainly is this big area, which is, well, it contains a tiled windowing system. They call the windows areas in Blender speak, but it's kind of the same kind of thing. And here you can see you've got a big window in the center here, and you've got a thin little one underneath it, and then a couple more over to the right hand side there. And this is all very flexible. You can grab the area between them and change the sizes if you like, or you could drag the corners and split a window into two windows, or you could do the opposite and turn two back into one again, things like that. And for every window that exists here, there's a little button in the corner there at the top here in this version. And when you click this one, it lists all the different things that you can make that window do. So if I wanted to make it into a Python console, there we go, there's a Python console. And if I wanted to make it into outline or whatever, I'll put it back to where it is for now. And so that's how the windowing system works. And if you like a particular setup of windows, you can save them. And next to the regular menu at the top here, there's lots of presets of different window systems that you can choose as well if you want to. They're there, but I'll stick for this kind of setup for this, just to keep things a bit simpler. In terms of what these windows, these default ones, are actually doing, well, the big one here is called the 3D view. It's the view onto the scene. I mean, we're working in 3D, even if you're not using 3D assets. You're working in a 3D environment regardless, and this is the view onto that. This thin one at the bottom is a timeline. If you're doing animation or video or simulation work, then you might use that. It's like timelines you might found in other tools. If you're not using a timeline, if you're not doing animation right now, you could always close it up and just make this one bigger. And over this side, we've got one up here called the outliner. This is a bit like a file browser in Windows, something like that. But it's for the assets within your scene instead of files. And then this bit below is a properties box, and you can see there's lots of tabs with lots of properties here. This is for obviously setting properties on just about anything you can imagine that might be in the scene. The other thing that you may notice is that this scene is not empty. It's not come in completely blank as you might expect. It's actually got some things in it. And this is because it comes in with a completely working, fully equipped scene for you to use. So the object of this scene is this cube here. It's a 3D model. And this 3D model has been assigned with what we call a material. So that's what's making it look grey. And you can see up in the not the properties, the outliner here, that these things are listed here as well, if you like. But then you've got this thing. This is a camera. Reason you have a camera is that the flow line for Blender is usually that you make some kind of scene out of 3D models or whatever you're using. And then quite often what you will then do is effectively take a photo of it using a tool called the renderer, which then produces a nice image for you. So that's a 2D image from a 3D scene. So that's usually how it works. And as this is a camera, I mean, you've got camera type settings available here. Sort of, there we go, focal length and things like that. So you can set all that up as you need. But as with real life and cameras need light in order for them to really be very effective. And so this last little thing here, that's a light object. This one's a spotlight. No, this is a point light. Sorry, wrong word there. It works like a light bulb, and you can set values for that at all, the power and how far it extends, things like that. However, there's a second source of light that doesn't have an object in here, but is significant, and certainly for making map objects, this is worth considering, is that if you go to the world settings, there is another source of light which gives you a general sort of ambient light through the whole thing. If I turn this little light off, bam, it's now disabled for now. And if I go to a preview of what the scene might look like if we rendered it, you can see we can still see the cube there. mean, you can still see it's grey, so there must be another source of light, and that's what this is. And we can, if we take it down, yep, no light, or we can bring it up. So there's actually a separate set of light, source of light there going on there. Let's put that back to, is it 1? And then make this one live again. And then the final thing to make all this scene work, if you want to do that, is to render it. Now there's lots of settings for rendering, of how big the render is and whatever. We'll get to that in a minute, but for now we'll just go to the render thing up here, press render image, and a new window comes up with a picture of a cube. So there we go, there's your first Blender project successfully done. And if you've got this picture, you can go to image and save it as a PNG or a JPEG or whatever you want to save it as. But personally, I don't want a picture of a cube right now, so I'm not going to do that. But there we go. So that's kind of the general idea of what Blender's flow line is. So in using it, it's usually some variation of that, where you'd replace the cube with something more interesting, because we don't really want pictures of cubes very much, and setting up the lights and the camera accordingly. And sometimes you might do that because you're taking an image, sometimes you're making animations and whatever. So there's lots of options here, but that's usually what we do. So let's get into a few things you can do to actually be a bit more interesting than making cubes. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to open a scene I made earlier. We don't want that one because it's not very interesting. And I'll talk about some of the things we can do in this. Now I'm going to turn on for this part a little plugin we've got, which means that when I do things, you can see in the bottom corner, it's showing you the key presses and the mouse commands. Blender likes using shortcut keys. There's other ways of doing just about everything. There's gizmos and there's menus and whatever, but shortcuts are usually the way to do it. So hopefully this will give you a clue without having me say it out loud all the time. So what can we do with this? We've got a scene, we've got some more things in here. You can see what it is, and you can see in the outline that they're all listed here, and what we've got in here. So things we can do, we can look around the scene. So I can use my mouse to look around. I can zoom in with the mouse wheel. I can do some panning if I press shift at the same time in the mouse wheel, things like that. This is all really basic things and simple, and that's kind of the point in a way. I want to show the simple stuff first. So another thing you can do as far as looking around is that there are some preset views, so we can look straight down or straight from the side, things like that. I can do that from my numeric keypad, or I can use this colorful thing here to do a similar thing as well if you've got a laptop and you don't have a numeric keypad to hand. So there's some simple things. In terms of the objects, and next thing, which is a really simple but important thing to do, is be able to select something. So if I click that chair, there we go, we've selected it, it's got an outline on it now, and we can do that. We can select one thing at a time, we can select multiple things using shift. We've got tools like box select, which will select lots of things at once, or we can press A and select everything, or disable them like that. So selecting is an important thing to be able to do. Once you've selected something, well, that's not much fun in itself, but there's something that's called transforms. This is where you move, rotate or scale an object. So there's lots of options here. So I could just do a free form move. The G key kind of does that. Or I could do a GX and make sure it's just on one axis there. Or perhaps if I went into overhead mode and moved it, what it would do, it's actually just going to keep it on two axes, so it's going to stay on the ground. So that's quite useful there. And then another one, rotation, is another sort of transform. The R key initiates that, and again, it could be free form, and it's not very useful in free form mode there. So I could do an R and a Z, say, and then it's going to rotate on that axis, and we can do this with any kind of object. And similar thing with scale as well. So if the Incredible Hulk's coming for dinner, then you might want a big chair for him, but that's not the case here, so I'm going to leave it like it is. So this is all very simple stuff. It's kind of obvious, but it's the essence of what you need to do to be able to get started with this. Now, another thing which is going to be very useful, and all of this is happening in what's called object mode. So it's kind of like Lego mode, in that you're just using predefined things and arranging them, if you like. So it is all quite simple at the moment. If I go into overhead mode, let's put a chair there. what I'm going to do now is duplicate, so we can do a proper duplication of an object. So this is like now a completely independent version. I'll rotate that round. Or we could do, if I do Alt and D, we can do an instance. So if I was to edit one of them, they'd both get edited, something like that. And let's do another one over here as well, and then move it around maybe. So there we've got our dinner party sort of going underway. Perhaps we could do the same with the plates as well. There we go. It is a very simple thing. Bang, 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 and so on. So there's your duplicate. So we're getting some stuff going on here, just with some very simple commands. Now, if someone phones up and says they're not coming to their dinner party after all, then we might want to delete their chair. So we can select that, maybe select the plate as well, press X for delete, and we've got a delete thing here, and then the objects go away again and they're removed back from the outliner. So yeah, this is all really simple stuff, but it's the things you really need to know before you even worry about maps. Now, you might be wondering how any of this got here in the first place, and there's a few ways you could do that. One of the simple ways of getting a new object in the scene is to obtain the object from some other source. So that might be something you generate in your GIS, or it might be something you download from a model website or something like that, and you just import it. So there's a tool up here, File, Import, and you could choose some format that we want. And I know that I've got an FBX format file ready to go. So if I go up to here, there we go, and choose my carafe one and import it. Bam, there we go. That's one way of getting a new model in the scene, and we need to move that over there a little bit. It's looking a bit odd there. Let's just, if I select it and then go here, I'll explain this a bit better later, but for now, there we go. There's a better glass one. Blender has a new or fairly new function called asset manager or asset browser. It works a bit like a video game. So if we set this one up, it does take a little bit of doing. You can browse all the objects you've made before. So if I wanted to put a bin, say, I could just copy the bin straight into the scene from the asset browser. So that's another way of getting things in, and that's really nice if you get it sorted out. There's an add menu. You might have seen that on the menu up here. This is another way of introducing new things. So if I wanted to put another light in it, I could do one from here, or another camera, although you only get one active camera. Or at the top here, we've actually got some models we can put in. So let's choose a torus, and when you do that, you've got some parameters you can use for that. So let's make it a little bit more donut-like and scale it down and put it on someone's plate there. So that's another way of getting an object in here. There we go. That's just being a bit silly, but again, perhaps we need to make it look donut color. Oh, it's a glass donut. That's not what we wanted. There we go. So there. So this is all object mode stuff. And if you're thinking this looks kind of simple, it is. And yeah, don't be afraid of Blender because it seems like it's going to be a hard thing. There's lots of hard stuff in it, but not all of it is. And what we've done now is use some very, very simple commands to actually prepare a scene, which ultimately is going to end up looking quite good. So yeah, that's that bit. However, if you're wondering about, well, what happens if we want a model that we don't have a model available for, what do we do with that? So let's have a quick go at making a model from scratch. So I'm going to put my cursor there, and I'm going to go to this add menu again and go to cylinder, because what I'm going to try and make here live, which is a bit scary, is a post box. So if I put in there, let's see, 0.22 and 1.55 is kind of post box sized. So we can go over here, and this is going to introduce us to the edit menu. Edit mode. And so I'm going to switch now. I'll do it here, but you can use tab to do this. And as soon as you go to edit mode, what you see is all of the parts of the model that make up the model, like you've got faces and edges and points, things like that. They're all available. So you can select any of them, just like we selected the models, and we can transform them and form them that like we did. So we can rotate them and do all that stuff. And making a model to a large extent is doing that. It's just moving stuff around until you get something which looks like the model that you were hoping to create. So what I've done there is just moved everything up a bit. So there we've got our post box. Now, the problem I've got now, though, is that all of the vertices you can see there, they're all doing a good job at making this cylinder shape. So I can't really move those to get any more detail because I want to do a bit more. So one really common extra modeling tool that you might want to know about is called a edge loop, and it just cuts right around the faces. As long as they've got 4 edges, then it works. There we go. And then we can move it down a bit. So I can put some more vertices there. Let's do another one and put it up. And now I've got that bit. What we can do is we can go to the face mode and make sure I can see everything through it. Let's select those ones and scale them on the X and Y. There we go. And now we've got one of those little bases that a post box might have. Same with the top. We can do the same kind of deal, but there's another command, an extrude, that we can use, which is probably a bit more effective here. So extrude moves the face up and then fills in the gap with a whole lot of new faces. So let's scale that a bit. Let's do another one. That'll do. And then one more and scale those in a bit. And maybe one more and scale them into the middle. There we go. So we've started to get a post box kind of shape with just 2 commands and the transforms here. We haven't got an actual box, a little hole to put the letter box. I'm just talking rubbish now, aren't I? To put the letters in. Sorry about that. I'm trying to think and talk at the same time. So what I'll do another loop cut there, and I'll do one here. And actually what I'll come and do is get rid of everything else for a second. There we go. So that I can see it from the front. There we go. I'm going to go to the face mode, select some faces. That'll do. Let's go there. And bam, let's extrude them out a bit like we did before. Oops. Why is that not extrude? Are you gonna? That was weird. Let's go back. Why did that happen? I don't know. Let's try again. We got the faces there, and we'll extrude them. That's what we wanted. I'll flatten them. I can scale them on the y-axis to 0, I think. So let's see. This will go. Let's see if this works. There we go. They're all flattened. I can bring them in. I can use my move again. It's the same commands that we had before. I'm just using them a different way. Let's get the top bit. Let's do that one and move it down a bit. Oh no. There we go, GZ, that'll do. And maybe these ones and move them up. If I select these 2, I can make a little lip around the edge. So that's that scale X. Is that going to go to there? A couple more loop cuts, one here, and then we can choose these bits in the middle, extrude them in, and we've got a little hole there for that. One last thing I'll do for this, because modeling is something that if you're making maps, it's useful to know about, but it's probably not the main thing. But this is why I'm sort of rushing through this. Let's get some more faces, extrude those. We'll do a scale to that one as well. GY, move them back. We'll take this one and this one. Again, scale X. Couple more lines, one there, and extrude that in, and now we've got the collection sign thing going on. So there we go. We've made a post box really quickly. It's a bit odd looking because you've got these lines. We can deal with that. If we do a right click and shade smooth, it goes all smooth, but that's probably too smooth. There's a tool over here. These are modifiers. These do some general task on the model. You can stack all these up, but if I do edge split, there we go, that's made it nice and sharp. So let's bring everything back again. We've got a post box. Now what you'll notice about this is that it's kind of the wrong color. It's not red. We want a red one. So this is where the next big chunk of Blender theory comes in how to give things colors and patterns and all of that. So you heard me talk about materials earlier, so that's what we need to do. And the idea with materials is that we've got all these faces here, and you can assign a different look to every face in here, or you can assign one look to all of the faces if you want, or something in between. So to do this, we go to the panel here, and it says cylinder. That's another thing we probably should do. Let's call it post box. or something that's random because I didn't type right. There we go, caps is on. There we go. And what we can do here is look in the little library for all the materials we've got. We could choose one. We choose that one, and that goes on. But what we haven't got here is a red one. So I'll remove this one, and we'll make a brand new one. There we go. So we've got a new material here, and this box is listing all the materials that we're associating with the post box in particular. So we've got that. We'll give it a name. We'll call it post box red. And all of this down here is what's going to set what it looks like. So for now, we'll just give it a red color because that would do. And there we go. We've got the red color. But obviously, post boxes aren't completely red. There's a bit more to it than that. So maybe we need a couple more of these. So we'll make a slot here for a couple more materials. So we'll make a new one and we'll call it black. And we'll make another one and we'll call it collection times or something. That'll do. The black one, we need to set that up to be black, so that's going to be fairly obvious. We drag that down there. We're going to get a black texture, and this collection times one, that will stay. We'll leave that white for a second. Now you can see here though that nothing's happened with those because we actually need to tell Blender which faces we want to use these on. It's defaulting to the top one at the moment. So if I go back into edit mode, and we can see we've got these two selected now. So I'll select collection times and press assign, and now we've got that one on there. For the black one, let's go here. We've got a bit crooked stuff going on there, but never mind. There we go. Black, choose the black one and assign that. And to the bottom, let's just go to X-ray road so I can see the right way through, and then assign that. So there we go. It's looking a lot more like a post box there. Now, what you're missing here is that the sign doesn't have any writing on. So what we need to use is an image that has got collection times on it. So how do we do that? Now, using this down here, we could potentially use this interface, but it's kind of gets hard if you start making too many complex things in here. So let's make a new window here. Let's do that and set this one to the shader editor. And now this is something that you're going to be familiar with. This is another version of looking at the same thing that was in this, but now it's a lot easier. So we have this node here, which represents a shader, which turns the parameters into colors and whatever else. And then the output here is by this one. Now to make a image, we need an image texture node. So we can put that in here. We can then open up from our file system a suitable image. So I think we've got in here a postal times one that we can use. There we go. And we can plug that into the color to replace. Are we on the right one here though? Where are we? Just a minute. What have we got? We want to do it on that one. So let's do that one. Image, replace. And now we have nothing because we need to do that again, don't we? There we are. Postal, bump, bump. And now we've got something that's kind of disappointing. We've got a part of it, and that's the reason for that is that the model needs to have a mapping between the image and the core model, and that mapping is known as texture coordinates, or at least the coordinates of what's used to create that, and they're often known as UVs. That's something that's kind of tricky to explain in a short time, but what I can do just to sort it out is open this UV editor window, and we can go into here and we can see this editor. And if I just select these two and select them here, you can see that what we're getting is just this little part shown in here. So if I was to move these around and scale them up, let's see, scale Y just slightly less, move it a bit, scale X, something like that. There we go. That's how images map onto faces like that. And then the final one, just quickly before we jump into the mapping side, is that if I go back to, let's click that again and go back to the red, you'll notice the red is very, very red. There's in real life, it's going to be more varied than that. And we can do something about that. We can use a different sort of texture, one that's generated by Blender itself. And in this case, I'm going to use a noise one, which is just going to make a load of mess. So if I plug that into there, you see what's going on there. That's a bit weird. And if I plug this one in, you just get the red channel, which comes out as a grayscale here. So that's kind of the idea we're going for, but it's obviously not red now. So there's one other little node that we can add in called a color ramp. If we put that in there and then make this bit red, there we go. Now we've got a more dirty, realistic thing. So that's that's a first preview of how materials work. So that's an important thing. Now, if I move my post box over here, say, when you've got all that, then actually this scene has already got some lights in it. It's already got a camera in it all set up. So it is actually ready to render. So let's just set that off. And then while that's going, just quickly, I'll explain what's happening here. Now you can see it's not happened very quickly. There are two types of renderer tool within Blender. The one we saw first when we did the cube is called Eevee, and that's a real-time render that makes an image very, very quickly, but cuts corners in how it does it. And then the other renderer that's in there is called Cycles, and that's the one I've got set up here. And this takes a lot longer, and it depends on how you set it up. I mean, that was actually a very quick version of it because I set the parameters right down on it, but you can see what you get from that. You can see how our scene looks. The post box sadly is flying, but that's my fault for doing that. And so this could save this as an image if you wanted as well. So that's kind of how Blender works. And the Cycles, the renderer we just used, the settings are here. You can set how big the output is. You can set color spaces and noise thresholds and all sorts of things in here to make the end result different. So there's a lot of build up there. Now, one thing, the reason I made a post box, this is leading to the map side now, is that potentially what we could do with this, we could go file and export, and then we could choose a format, say FBX or something like OBJ or something. And then you could use that model that we created in an application, potentially a GIS application that can support it. So this could go into, if you use Esri or Skyline, Terra Explorer, or whatever, that model that we made could be used for that. However, I suspect that many of you here actually wanted to create map type things within Blender. So let's start from scratch with that now. So let's go over here, close this one up, and start again. So what can we do in maps? You've already seen that what we can do is use images, because Blender doesn't know about coordinate reference systems or shape files or things like that by default. So what it does know about is images, so we can use that as a start. So I've created some images here to play with. So let's use these and see what we can do with that. So I could create a plane now and put the image on the plane, but there's actually, if we go to import, there's a secret images as plane option here. That doesn't appear by default. You need to go to preferences and enable it in the add-ons bit here if you want to use that, but it's here for my one, so we'll use it. And so if I do import images as planes, it's going to open up somewhere. So let's go and find out, where are we? Let's go here and open the, let's open the imagery one and set it so it's pointing upwards. That'll do. There we go. And hopefully, there it is. I'll scale it up a bit, make it a bit easier to see. Just make sure that's actually, I might rotate it 100 degrees as well. Nope, nope. That didn't work. Go back. Z 180. And I'm in the view that just shows it without the texture. So let's change it so that you can actually see the texture that's on there, just to make sure. We'll do the pre-render one. There we go. And that's what we got. Now you might think that, oh, it's looking a bit odd. If we go to this, that same shader editor thing that we had before, you can see it's made a node tree, just like what we did for the post box for this one too. So we can already edit this. So I'm noticing it's very shiny here. We've got a specular option here. Let's cut that down. That's a bit better. And if we go to the render settings and the color management as well, something I'd suggest is if you're doing sort of abstract mapping type jobs, you change this one that says filmic, which works well for sort of 3D normal scenes, to standard, which is a bit better for things like this. And you could go to high contrast as well if you want to make it a bit more elaborate. So there's things like that we can do there. So we've got that. So, but it's just a moment of playing with an image on it. What can we do? Well, you've seen we've got a height map there. So can we turn this into proper terrain? And we can do that. There's a couple of ways we can use this environment here, but the older and perhaps the easier one to show you now is to use a modifier. So before I do that, I just need to introduce that texture, the height map texture. Let's give it a name like that, and introduce that into the scene just as its own thing. So if I go there and choose the height map, there we go, and put it in there, it's now in our scene. So with this selected, I can go to here. We saw modifiers before when we did the edge split, but now we're going to use one called displace, which is going to use that height map if we tell it to. So there's our height map in the options there. And yeah, you can see something happened. It moved, but it's probably not doing what you were expecting it to do. There's a couple of other things we need to think about. So displace moves vertices, but going into edit mode, you're familiar with this from before, you can see there's only 4 vertices here. So there's not much for it to work with really. So if I do a right click on here and subdivide this up, and there's an option here to do a lot more subdividing. In fact, let's do it again. Let's do a bit more. There we go. Now it's got a lot more to move about. So if we go here, we can see up now we've got something. It's probably again not quite what we wanted. And this goes back to the texture mapping thing we mentioned earlier as well. If I go to here, we can't see what's being mapped on this, but we can, let's open that up a bit. There we go. We can add this and we can see this is using UV texture coordinates like we used before for the sign. And over here, it says it's just using local coordinates. So let's go to UV there and look at that. We've now got, that's probably a better view there. We can see that it's now giving us something here, which is a lot more what we're wanting. Let's change mid-level down. We don't really need that. And we can change the strength of how much it's being affected. So there we go. So this is nothing particularly new, but this is how to get to that stage. However, we can be a bit more creative here. Let's add in another texture. Let's add in another image texture like we had. You've seen we've got some more of these. Open this one up. And in here, let's put the OML map, open map local, in there as another texture to use. Let's give ourselves some space. What we're going to do as well is go to color, go to mix RGB. This will mix colors from 2 textures together. So I'll plug that one into there, plug that one into there, and plug the output of that into our shader. And now what you should see is kind of a mix of the 2. And if we use this little thing here, we can move between them. Now, something I've not mentioned too much yet is animation. Potentially, I could make this into a movie that does that and changes that in that way. Another thing we could do perhaps is use another texture again. Now, this is another procedural one called a gradient texture. We could plug that into this. Actually, let's do it with a factor. That's probably more sensible there, into that. So the texture defines where the mix of the 2 is. There we go. So you can see it's going from one side to the other there. And if that needs to be controlled, we could put a math one in there and then do a multiply. And if we do that, go on, are you going to possibly let me, there we go. I mean, you could animate it doing that as well if you wanted to. And then the final one I was going to use and show you just quickly, there's another texture in here, another image one. Let's put that there. In theory, what I should have done even with the last one is plugged it back into there to make sure everything's mapped the same, but it is anyway. What I'm going to do with this was the road networks. They were black lines in there. So we could just, you can see there, it's kind of inverted it there, but never mind. And it's got a transparency alpha with that one as well. So what I'm going to do there is use another, we did this before, color ramp. I'm going to use that one to change its core color. And for a bit of fun, I'm going to make a different shader here, an emission shader, which should make things glow. So if I plug that into that one, now we've got two shaders. We can't plug both of them into the end, so I need to mix them together. So there's a mixed shader for that job. So we put both of them into here, and we should get glowing. Ooh, is it going to work? This is scary when everyone's watching, and it hasn't done anything, has it? Why not? That's a bit odd. I'll tell you why. It's probably because I've not set this to it being a useful color. So if I was to make it yellow, there we go. Now it's glowing, but it's glowing too much. It's glowing, everything's glowing. So what I'm going to do is take the alpha channel of that image and plug that into the factor. And we're starting to get some glow now, and we can see here, and we can set that up. But it's still not glowing right, is it? There's one other thing that I need to do then. You've got to tell the renderer that you want to be glowing using a bloom. There we go. And now, there we go. We've got something which starts to become a bit more cool now. So that's a way of using images. How much time have we got? Another thing I want to move on to, I could fiddle with that and make it look a lot better, but I think you get the general idea of what's going on here. And the fact that this environment here of using textures and inputs and all sorts of things is very, very powerful. You'll see that again in a minute. However, what happens if you want to use Blender with vector data or with other types of GI resources? You maybe don't want to use images all the time like that. Is there anything else you can do? And the answer is yes, there is. Let's just flip back to my PowerPoint just briefly. There is an add-on, a free add-on you can get from GitHub called Blender GIS. So if you get this, then guess what? It spatially enables Blender, and then you can use things like shapefiles and whatever directly within it. So I've got that installed. The way to install it, again, you go to edit mode, preferences, you'd go to install, you'd install the zip file that comes, and add it onto here, which you enable, and you click the little box. And when you do that, you then get a new menu option up here called GIS, and this has got things like import shapefile and export shapefile and other things like that. So yeah, that's obviously very relevant here. Now, there's a couple of things I'll show you with this. First of all, on the very first bit at the top here, there's an option to create a base map. Now, this is quite cool, this. So if we go to that one, you'll see that we can use lots of different mapping sources. You can configure your own. So at one point I did, our own OS APIs in here. And so let's do it with Google for now, and let's do that. And I'll just show you what happens. So it takes you to this temporary data browser thingy here, where you can go and choose an area. So I could scroll around and do it, or I could press Shift and G, and hopefully, if it's going to do it and not do a, go on, please don't do that. There we go. What we could do is I could search for somewhere, Bognor Regis, and I could do a zoom level. This is the standard zoom levels you'd expect. So let's go to 17, do that. And bam, Bognor. There we go. Let's go to Butlins and do that. And when I'm ready and I've found what I want, then if I do a Shift E, I think this is, and it turns it into, it's now a plane, and it's made a regular Blender object from that data. And if I go to shader editor, you can see it's made this sort of thing for us too. What's more, if I go to the scene settings, I'm not showing you this yet, and go to custom properties, you can see that it's populated the scene with information about the location and the coordinate reference system that we used when we created this base map. So anything else I do from here on in, it's going to be using those settings. So if I want to say import, there's options to get vector data from OSM and get a terrain from here as well. I won't do that for now, but let's just import my own shape file from our own data here. And where we'll go, what we've got, I think we've got some buildings that might go with it. So put those in there. Ooh. And it's got a little menu here. And what I can do is say, actually, I want to extrude the buildings with one of the attributes that exists within that shapefile. I'll leave separate for now. The CRS is right. Let's go for it. So there we go. We know we've got some buildings going on there. In terms of coordinate reference systems, what this doesn't do very well unless you start messing with Python installs is reprojection. So it's better to plan ahead and get everything in the same coordinate reference system before you even start, really. So that's what I've done here. And there we go. Now this is regular Blender Object 2. You can see it up there. I could go into edit mode if I wanted to. There's a bit missing there. You can see on the imagery that isn't in our data for whatever reason. So I could let's move that a bit and then select that one and extrude it. There we go. Maybe do that loop cut thing as well. Let's put one there and one there and do one here. That's why sometimes being able to edit is useful there. We could do a couple of those there, perhaps one here. Let's do that, move it up a bit, make a little roof, so on. So yeah, once you're here, you're free to do what you want. Now this one doesn't seem to have a material, so we could make a new material for this one perhaps and give it, I don't know, give it a color. We're in the wrong mode to see it. There we go. And do all of the sorts of things you can do in the materials mode. Perhaps we could make this metallic. Would that work? Let's see, metallic. There we go, a bit more shiny. There we go, something like that. So you can see where that could go. Now, one other thing I'll do, I'll start with another new one here. I know we're getting towards time. Don't save it. Let's do another one. And you don't have to start with their base map. You can start with anything. You can start with a georeferenced image or shapefile or whatever. What I'll do now, though, is I'll import, instead of something more obvious, what I'll do is I'll import, if I can find them, some contours I prepared from our Terrain 50 product. It needed a little bit of preparation to actually make sure there was full 3D geometry. You can't, so there we go. That kind of works. We got this here, so not very exciting, but there's some tools here which are quite cool. I thought I'd show you quickly. So once you've got this, we could do a Delaunay triangulation from it and make a tin from it, and that's now a separate object. You can see there we could get rid of the contours and just have that. And again, to make my point about how powerful the shader side of it is, let's go to the shader editor. There's another option here which is going to generate us some materials for terrain analysis. So there we go. Let's make sure it's being used. So this one has got height, and we've got, I think there's one for slope, and there's one for aspect here. Whether you like the results of these or not is up to you, but what you're seeing here is the power of this environment, in that what's going on here is it's actually taking the geometry as an import in the shader editor and doing, it's taking the actual face normals and then doing some maths on it to work out what color is going to be used. So if you can mentally take that forward of how you might be able to use that, then you can see quite how powerful this is. So there's that one. Now, one last thing I wanted to show you. Now, this is something that I'm fairly sure you won't have ever seen, because it's well, we may have done, but I doubt. Let's open, let's see, have I got, I think it's this one, a completely different project here. And what I'm going to do is briefly go back to this again and talk about something which is pretty, well, relatively new in Blender, called geometry nodes or geonodes. And like the shader editor you saw, this is a similar thing, but it works for geometry. So that you start out with a very simple geometry, say a plane, and end up with something more complex by a set of rules. So I've got a slide here which kind of shows you it. So if we had a plane, we could do an extrude node on it, and it would turn it into a block, and we could scale one part of it, say, that turns it into a little trig point, if you like. We could do a material setting in there that would make that. And if you want to be creative, you can do anything. So I did one which then covered it in giant spiders just because I felt like it. And so you can see you can turn it a geometry into anything you want using this. And you then save the actual set of nodes to reuse, and then you start out with a different base shape, and it was going to give you a different object. So I did start wondering if there's anything I could do with that, with mapping, and could I use such node setups to define how our large scale data would look. So that's something I've been working on. I've got down here, you can see, I've got some Python going on here, and what I'm going to do is use some Python to batch import some large scale data that I've processed in FME. FME is another way of using Blender, which I've not mentioned because we're not really using that in this tutorial, but I've got here, let's run that. This is going to just bring in lots of objects that came from our large scale data that I pre-processed into objects that Blender can understand. And there we go. We've got all of these parts loaded in. They all look white because it doesn't really matter at the moment, but you can see over in the outline all the different objects that have come in, all the different types of features we have are now separate. Well, they're separate objects. Like, you can think of them as layers if you like. And I've pre-prepared all like that. Now, that's all very well, but what I really wanted to show you is if I've got in a set of objects like that, what I can do is with another Python script, I can associate all of those object types with one of those node groups, which is going to then turn what was a simple, say a simple polygon or a point or whatever it was to start with into something completely different. So if I run that, bam, there we go. So suddenly, and this is with the image I showed you earlier on, I didn't explain what it was. This is automatically turning large scale basic data into something a whole lot more common or more complex. So in this case, there's area feature there, which I thought, well, okay, this area is mixed vegetation, so we can then scatter using the geometry nodes, and we can show you what that looks like there. We can use lots of pre-built objects and scatter them all over them because we know it's a you know there's trees there, and we can do it like that. Over here there's one that hasn't been worked as yet, so let's just do that because I kind of did it on purpose. Let's choose these things. Those are the boulders. So if I go to our modifiers panel and add a geometry nodes one from there and set that to the boulders one, I think there's a boulders one. There we go. You can see there we've got a boulders one, and that is it's giving a material to the base area, but then is scattering little boulder models that I created separately and brought in as part of it. Another thing we've got, you can do, have you got any fences? We turn, there we go, we've got some fences. They were just line features, which I then, using the similar method, extended up and then put little fence posts along the edge of it. So I thought I'd show you that. That's not a beginner's thing. It took a bit of setting up to do that, but I think the geometry nodes tool is very powerful and it's a very exciting one. So yeah, there's lots of potential here. And so what I'll do now is just jump back. Where's my thing? So that was what we saw there. Just to finish it off, really, there's quite a lot I've covered there, a real lot, and yet it's still a fraction of what you can really do with this thing. As I said there, don't get intimidated. Go and do the really simple things and get something from that. Just create some things, make import some models, make a render from it, and go from there like we did. As far as mapping goes, try using images that you've generated in QGIS or wherever, import them in and see what you can do with that. And you know, even if you only use a fraction of it, it's a free tool. It doesn't matter. Take it where you want it to go to. And I've got some links here. So if you're watching this back, maybe you can see it on the video. I might, well, I've got a GitHub account. I might be able to share some things if you'd like me to do that. and I need to look into what I can share, but I'll look into that as well. But other than that, I think we've got to just about the end here. So hope you enjoyed that. Do you have any questions? And are you still here? Are you still awake? Because it's kind of lonely doing this.
Guy, that was brilliant, I have to say. Just a couple of minutes left. If anybody's got any questions they'd like to put in the chat. There's been a couple of comments, but I love GeoNodes was the last one I saw.
Yeah, okay.
There was a request for the PowerPoint. Someone thought that was useful, and probably with those links, if you can make those available, that'd be great. Obviously, we will make the video available for people on the YouTube channel as soon as we can. But perhaps, Guy, if you're able to, if you can send it to Paul and he can share it through Liz to people who attended the event.
Yes, okay, I can do that. I will put together. I'll figure out what things I can share. Certainly the PowerPoint I can, and the links, things like that. I'll share those out, and some of the other things, the models and things. If you want to play with those, I can do that. Yes.
Brilliant.
But yeah, it's a different thing. It's not a GI tool, but there's lots you can do with it if you start to get your head around what's in there. I know there was a lot in that, but go for it, try it. There's nothing stopping you, really.
Fantastic. Lots of comments, lots of thank yous, and interesting and inspirational. That was a really good presentation. I know you were covering a very complex package there, Guy. So